Well, hey, everybody. In today's video, I'm going to go on a deep dive into the GI Map. This is a wonderful test that really looks in detail at your microbiome. It is a PCR, polychain reaction test that looks at genetic components of different bacteria and also looks at digestive health markers, looking at markers for inflammation, for fat absorption, different enzymes, different things like that, different immunoglobulins that are in your gut that are a part of your immune system. And so legal disclaimer, of course, this video is not meant to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical condition and is for informational purposes only. The video is not a treatment protocol and does not replace a consultation with a healthcare practitioner. You are fully responsible for what you do or don't do with the information in this presentation. And so when we look at the gut, we know that there is one cell wall that separates the blood and the digestive system. And when we have rich and balanced bacterial communities, we have a normal functioning immune system, a really good, potent, strong immune system that keeps pathogens down, but doesn't overinflame our body. However, when we have a poor and unbalanced bacterial community or dysbiosis, we end up with an immune system that's targeting its own tissue, that's creating lots of inflammation, and we end up with autoimmunity, allergies, and metabolic disorders. And so what causes this state of imbalance in the gut? Chronic stress, food sensitivities, low stomach acid production. And we're going to talk about all these things. And this is the great thing about this GI map test. It really gives us triggers into a lot of these things: poor bile flow, bacterial overgrowth, yeast or parasitic overgrowth. And so when we look at a healthy gut versus a leaky gut, we know that the tight junctions, if you look on the right there, the tight junctions that hold the gut lining in place are torn, they're broken. And we also have large undigested food particles, as well as immune cells and bacteria and yeast cells that are now getting into the bloodstream, driving up inflammation. And so what are some of the major factors there? Low stomach acid is a huge issue when it comes to leaky gut and digestive problems, different infections, use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, just chronic stress in general elevates cortisol, which causes a gapping or weakening in these tight junctions. And then different toxins like glyphosate, for example, which is an herbicide that's used on a lot of food products, glyphosate, and that will cause damage to the gut. Other pesticides and herbicides and other toxins like mold, heavy metals that we may be exposed to will all cause problems there. Parabens and phthalates from plastics can all cause issues there as well. So when we're looking at the GI map, the first part of the GI map, we're looking at bacterial pathogens, parasitic pathogens, and viral pathogens. And so we're looking at that and we're looking to see if anything is flagged high. And these are known pathogens. And so you've got things like C. difficile here, which you can see is marked high. C. diff is can be a major infection. In fact, there's a massive growth now of antibiotic resistant C. diff. And so that can be, a significant issue. But all of these are well-researched pathogens right here. And so if any of these are elevated and the person has significant symptoms, it may even be necessary to have a medical referral. You may need to go see a doctor and get on, a strong medication. But in a lot of cases, what I have seen is that there'll be some level of elevation, or just at least one of these pathogens will be present. And a lot of times natural strategies can help put these things back in balance right here. So these are the bacterial pathogens. We're going to go through all of these. So this is our major list of pathogens, well-studied pathogens. Campylobacter, this is one of the most common causes of foodborne illness in the United States. In fact, most of these are foodborne illnesses. They're eating bad food or drinking bad water. It can cause abdominal pain, diarrhea, malaise, and fever. May increase your risk of ulcerative colitis. In fact, typically when you get an inflammatory bowel disorder like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, usually it's post-infection, meaning that you've had some sort of infection, your body never fully recovered from it. So Campylobacter is one that's associated with ulcerative colitis. Clostridium, like I was talking about 2 to 10% of the population carry genes for toxin A and toxin B carried by that particular bacteria. And it can cause inflammation, cramping, fever, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and can also result in reactive arthritis. A lot of people, when they get this, they get a lot of pain in their joints. So all things to be looking out for. E. coli, this is the because there's a lot of different strains of E. coli, and same with Clostridium. There's lots of strains. Many of them are just natural parts of our gut microbiome, and they actually can be healthy. However, the enterohemorrhagic form of E. coli is not good, right? And hemorrhagic basically means, causes hemorrhage, right? So that is foodborne or waterborne. It can cause abdominal cramping, fever, fatigue, diarrhea, nausea, things like that. So big time problem there. Enteroinvasive, again, invasive in there, E. coli or Shigella. You can get infected with that bacteria through fecal contamination of ingested food. Again, cause diarrhea, vomiting, fever, chills, abdominal cramping, and fatigue, as well as reactive arthritis. You've got enteropathogenic. So again, pathogen means disease, right? E. coli. So it's looking for all these different types of pathogenic E. coli's, and then enterotoxigenic E. coli as well, traveler's diarrhea, Shigella, toxin E. coli. So you'll see that as well. Now, when you're running this from a functional medicine perspective, you typically don't see a lot of these elevated. You may see the presence of some like Giardia and Yersinia enterocolitica and stuff like that. I've seen Salmonella, but oftentimes you won't see them really elevated, because oftentimes when these are really elevated, the person's in a very acute stage and they're going in to see, a medical doctor. Typically they're going to the hospital because they're in a significant acute crisis, but you may see them show up just not at, levels that are high enough to be diagnosed with that specific infection, but still the genetic components may be elevated. And, with the GI map, what we always have to realize too, is that just because the genes are there doesn't mean the organism is alive and causing problems in the body. It could be just passing through, could have been on the food, but it could have been dead, or your body may have, eliminated it. The stomach acid that you produce may have killed it, and it may just be passing through in the stool. However, certainly it could be elevated, right? And so, you always have to base it on symptoms, how the person's responding, maybe their history, maybe they did have a past history of getting some sort of foodborne infection or something like that, or they traveled to another country and they drank the water and they got sick. So you do have to look at things like that. But Salmonella, is very well known. Most people have heard of that, and contaminated food can have that, cause a lot of different problems. Vibrio, cholera, right? So cholera, people have heard of that, cause a lot of different problems there, cause a lot of issues with blood pressure, for example. Low blood pressure can be an issue there, dry mucous membranes. Okay, again, Yersinia enterolytica could cause, a lot of issues, vomiting, fever, diarrhea, abdominal pain, can mimic Crohn's disease, and may trigger autoimmune thyroiditis or inflammatory arthritis as well. So like a lot of these can. Now, the well-known parasitic and viral pathogens that are tested are looking at Cryptosporidium, parasitic pathogen, can be picked up through contaminated food. Entamoeba histolytica can be spread through contaminated food, water, pets, sexual conduct. That one resembles ulcerative colitis, so bloody stools can be common with that, with the Entamoeba histolytica. And then Giardia. So these are different types of amoebas right here, which are multicellular organisms, and they can cause that. Giardia is common. It can cause diarrhea, cramps, bloating, intestinal malabsorption. This is one that can cause iron, zinc, and B12 deficiencies. And so I have seen this in people, not flagged high, but in their body. And these are people that have malabsorption issues. And so when I treated the Giardia, supported their stomach acid levels, bile flow, things like that, they were able to get better and regain weight and feel significantly better. Viral pathogens. So these are well-known viral pathogens as well that you can get from food, for example. fecal contamination. So adenovirus 4041 and norovirus can both be in contaminated food and water. So things to look out for. Now, in general, the GI map test and, when we're looking at healing the gut, there's a clinical approach, and the clinical approach is called the 5R treatment protocol. So I can't give specific treatment protocols, obviously, with a broad video like this, but in general, whenever you've got stuff like this going on, there's a step-by-step process. First step is remove. So that may be a course of antimicrobial, antiviral, or antifungal, or antiparasitic therapies, depending on what's going on, right? And this could be could be through medications like antibiotics, could be a natural treatment model. And so in the natural treatment model, we're using different antimicrobials like berberine, caprylic acid, garlic, oil of oregano, which can be really powerful, antibacterial, antiparasitic, uva ursi, olive oil, or olive leaf, I should say, extract, all can be powerful. There's other things like neem, clove that can be really effective here, wormwood, sweet wormwood or artemisian. Let's see, I can think of, there's just so many different things that would be included here. Again, antibiotics, so sometimes antibiotics are used, and GI map actually does look at some antibiotic resistant genes. So with some of the pathogens like H. pylori, for example, so you can look at that as well on this. Antifungals, caprylic acid is a really great antifungal. Garlic, oil of oregano, pau de arco is another one that's not there, but olive leaf, pau de arco is a great one. Antiparasitic, black walnut, garlic, oil of oregano, wormwood, I was talking about that, artemisia, berberine, golden seal, gentian, quassia bark, citrus seed, mimosa pudica is a great one there, antiparasitic, clove, great one. Antivirals, olive leaf, purified silver, cat's claw, monolaurin, echinacea, zinc, reishi, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin A. So all great stuff. Digestive support. That's the second phase, replace. So now we want to replace what's missing. So we need good stomach acid production, pancreatic enzymes. We need bile flow. So now we're trying to also support, and you can do these. Oftentimes we'll do these together. We'll do the remove and the replace together. Adding in betaine hydrochloride, so betaine HCl, apple cider vinegar, herbal bitters, ox bile, different pancreatic enzymes to break down fat, carbohydrate, and protein. So usually that's going to be like the first steps. And then we want to, as we're doing that, over time we move out the antimicrobials, and then we might want to add in some probiotics, repair supplements, right? And of course, we're always working on rebalance. And so probiotics, as well as, different types of prebiotics may be helpful, and immune support. So colostrum, different immunoglobulins, Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a helpful probiotic, also, really supports the immunoglobulins that your body produces in the gut. And intestinal barrier repair, so glutamine, aloe, DGL or deglycerinated licorice, marshmallow root, okra, N-acetyl glucosamine, quercetin, slippery elm, espellardi again, zinc carnosine, vitamin A, essential fatty acids, so omega-3s, B vitamins, magnesium plays a role in this. So a lot of good support nutrients like that can be really helpful for intestinal barrier support. So, and then of course, rebalancing is all about lifestyle, sleep, diet, exercise, stress management to keep things in balance on a regular basis. And so that's the 5R treatment protocol. So I'm going to revert back to that as we go through this video when I talk about, what you need to do for these things. I'm going to talk about the 5R protocol. So next thing we're looking at is H. pylori. Okay. And H. pylori is also very well researched. And, I believe it's something like 50% of the population has H. pylori overgrowth, right? So it's extremely common, and it can pass through kissing, through, eating the same food as somebody with H. pylori infection, because H. pylori can use the mouth and the saliva as a reservoir, right, to kind of stay in and to overgrow in. And this is why, for example, a lot of people with H. pylori overgrowth have perpetual bad breath. That is oftentimes one of the symptoms. And so this is looking for H. pylori levels, and it's also looking for virulence factors. Okay. And so when you see it marked high, along with virulence factors, it's causing a lot of problems in the body. All right. Now, H. pylori lives in the stomach. So it really, on a stool test, we're mostly looking at the large intestine. So for H. pylori, for enough of the DNA of the H. pylori to end up in the stool, tells us there's a pretty good amount in there. All right. And so even when I see H. pylori in any level, right, even if it's not elevated, if the person's having a lot of symptoms, I look at stomach acid markers, which I'll talk about. I look at their history, their symptoms, other lab tests. But if I see a pattern for low stomach acid and H. pylori is present, you got to treat that. You got to go in there and get it. And you could do it with just probiotics. Sometimes, there's research on probiotics actually eliminating H. pylori. However, not for everybody, right? For a lot of people, they need a more specific protocol for that. But that's a good first run, would be like probiotics and changing diet. But, somebody may have already tried that you're working with. So, you're not sure. Obviously it's case by case basis that takes place here, but H. pylori is a significant issue. And how does H. pylori get into the stomach lining? Well, H. pylori comes in, right? And it burrows its way into, the stomach lining here, as you can see, and it creates an enzyme called urease, which turns into ammonia, and that neutralizes the stomach acid, causing poor digestion and allows the H. pylori to thrive in the stomach. So it gets in there and burrows into the stomach, and it releases that enzyme, which shuts down stomach acid production. It can also damage parietal cells, which are the cells that produce the stomach acid. Okay, so oftentimes with H. pylori, over time, it can lead to gastric ulcer, can lead to stomach cancer, can lead to gastritis or just stomach pain as it wears down that mucous membrane, can lead to anemias, right? So iron malabsorption, zinc deficiencies, zinc malabsorption, vitamin B12 deficiencies as well, because we need stomach acid to be able to activate intrinsic factor, which is a protein responsible for absorbing vitamin B12. So if we have low stomach acid due to H. pylori, we may end up with a B12 deficiency. So 7 major functions of stomach acid. This is why stomach acid is so critical, needs to be supported. Sterilizes the food. When we eat food, it sterilizes it, so bacteria and pathogens don't get further along and colonize and infect us. Protein digestion, very critical for breaking down protein into amino acids so we can digest them effectively. Pepsin, which is an enzyme, it activates that, and pepsin is critical for digesting protein. Activates intrinsic factor, just like I talked about, for B12 absorption. Stomach acid, as it moves into the small intestine, it triggers receptors that allow the liver and gallbladder to dump bile. Bile is an alkaline fluid, and we need an alkaline environment in the small intestine. So the acid, the acidic bolus that's coming into, bolus is just pre-digested food, that's coming into the small intestine, triggers bile. So now that alkaline antimicrobial substance comes out, cleans up the small intestine, because there are some types of bacteria that can survive through the acid, but they can't survive the bile. So the bile breaks those down, keeps that microbial balance in order, and it also helps emulsify fats and maintains the alkaline environment that the small intestine needs. The stomach acid, when we produce enough, helps close the esophageal sphincter, which is the sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. And that's critical because if that esophageal sphincter is open, that can lead to stomach acid coming up and causing gastroesophageal reflux disease. So it helps close that, and then it helps trigger the opening, because once we get the acid low enough and we're able to digest the food faster, it opens up the pyloric sphincter so the food can move into the small intestine. Otherwise, and this is a common complaint for a lot of people with low stomach acid, is they just feel like the food, they eat food, it just sits in their stomach and it doesn't move. And that's because they're not producing enough acid. Now they're producing enough acid to cause reflux, right? And damage the esophagus, but not enough acid to really digest the food effectively. In fact, we need our acid levels, which are at rest. They're usually between 3 to 3.5 pH at rest. We need to get them down around 1.5 to 2.2 in order to really break down food and particularly meat effectively and move it into the small intestine. And that's energy. It takes energy to be able to produce that stomach acid. If we're not doing it, then we're not going to digest that food effectively, right? So that acid, that 3 to 3.5 that we have at rest, is still acidic enough to damage the esophagus and cause unwanted symptoms, but not acidic enough to really digest the food effectively, really sterilize the food, activate, the absorption of key minerals and amino acids. So we end up with this, in this really bad place where we cause a feeling like we have acid, too much acid in our throat, but we are not actually breaking down. We don't have enough acid. We're not breaking down our food. And so people end up taking acid blockers. They take Tums and Nexium and different things like this, which are PPIs that block the ability to produce stomach acid. So they don't have the heartburn, but now they're further diminishing the amount of stomach acid. So they're not digesting their food effectively. Okay. And the most common symptoms associated with H. pylori infection, which is the most common cause, H. pylori, of low stomach acid. The most common symptoms: abdominal pain, belching and gastric reflux, mild nausea. So a lot of people just feel nauseous on a regular basis just throughout the day. It's not dramatic, but they just kind of notice this mild nausea. Irritable bowel, so constipation, diarrhea, bloating, cramping, constant bad breath, like I was talking about, anemia because we're not absorbing iron or B12 effectively. And then, of course, low stomach acid, just not producing enough stomach acid. Now, people can also be underproducing stomach acid and not have an H. pylori issue if they are, just people as they age, if they're not taking good care of their body, if they have certain food sensitivities like gluten, for example, and they have celiac, they can underproduce stomach acid. If they are zinc deficient, because you need zinc to produce stomach acid. If they're under a lot of stress reduces your stomach acid production. So a lot of other reasons, but H. pylori is very common. Now, again, causes a low stomach acid. So kind of reviewing what I just said: chronic stress, H. pylori, zinc deficiency, food sensitivities, and aging. Some at-home tests that you can do, right? You can eat a 4 to 6 ounce steak, and that's it. Just eat steak, and you could put salt on it if you want. Eat that and then see how you feel. You should feel good. That's protein, healthy fats. You should feel great if, in the next 3 hours, you are burping, you feel like it's just sitting in your stomach, you feel more inflamed, your joints are inflamed, you have brain fog, you feel tired, okay, you have acid reflux, all signs you're not producing enough stomach acid. There's another test called the baking soda stomach acid test, where basically you just drink a little bit of baking soda in water, and you see, you do this first thing in the morning, and you should burp within 2 minutes, right? Basically, I think it's like a teaspoon of baking soda in some water. You should burp because the bicarbonate will mix with the stomach acid, and it will produce gas that will come up, and you'll burp. And if you don't, then it's a sign you may not be producing enough stomach acid. And then you can do a betaine HCl test, which is basically you just take a little bit of betaine HCl with your meal, and you see if you feel better, right? If you feel better when you're consuming that meal, it's a sign that you needed that amount of betaine HCl. If you notice that you don't feel anything, right, you may need more, right? If you don't notice any change, or if you notice that you have, if it actually causes worsening symptoms, it's a sign that either you took too much, or it's a sign that you may have a weakened gastric lining. So your gastric lining may be really, really weak. And you could do this test with apple cider vinegar as well, right? Where you take apple cider vinegar before a meal, and if you notice that it hurts, it's a sign you have a weak gastric lining. And when you have a weak gastric lining, we need to heal the gastric lining first. So things like marshmallow root, deglycerinated licorice root, aloe vera, L-glutamine, all very helpful for helping heal the gastric lining. So that way we can now start supplementing with betaine HCl and getting the stomach acid support we need. Now, some other low stomach acid signs that we're looking for on the GI map. So elevations in the H. pylori bacteria, as well as, and we're going to go into, the next page of the test, where we'll look at normal and also dysbiotic flora. And if we see these two types of dysbiotic flora, streptococcus, which normally lives in the mouth and gets killed by the stomach acid, if we see that high in the stool, that's a sign that it's coming, in from the mouth and we're not disinfecting it. And so it's getting in through the whole system. So streptococcus is a sign, and then possibly also the enterococcus bacteria as well can also be an issue with low stomach acid. And then on the GI markers, the testing for the markers of your gastrointestinal health, a lactase 1, if that is under 500, it's not going to be flagged unless it's under 200. But if it's under 500, it's a sign of functional low stomach acid. And then also if you have high steatocrit markers, now over 10%. Now it's not going to be flagged unless that's over 15%. But if it's up over 10%, along with the low elactase, I think low stomach acid. Okay. And then, looking at those other markers as well. Now, other blood markers, so you can compare this with blood markers as well. And if you see abnormal serum protein levels on your comprehensive metabolic panel and your complete blood count, that can be an issue. Low chloride and phosphorus, high blood urea nitrogen, BUN, which, that also can be a factor. Abnormally large red blood cell size, low B12 levels. Okay. Your B12 normally should be up over 800. So if you're eating meat regularly and you have B12 under 800, that can be an issue there. Your serum protein, right, should be between 6.9 and 7.4. If you're below that, that can be an issue with stomach acid. High homocysteine, which should be under 9. Homocysteine, we need B12 in order to metabolize homocysteine back into glutathione or SAMe. And if it's high, that could be a sign of low stomach acid, low iron, low serum ferritin. So low serum iron and ferritin. And I do another test on blood work, right? So you can revert back to that too, or another video on blood work. So where we go through all this stuff. And then low alkaline phosphatase levels. Alkaline phosphatase is a zinc-dependent enzyme. So if you see low alkaline phosphatase, again, that could be a sign of low stomach acid as well. Now, H. pylori treatment options. Okay, so consider probiotics, like I talked about. Sometimes that can be a good first line. S. pylori, so whatever you're looking for, that beneficial yeast, if you have that in that, could be effective. Also, spore-forming probiotics have been shown to be effective too. Herbal antimicrobials, things like mastic gum, MSM, zinc carnosine, DGL, which is D-glycerinated licorice root, bismuth citrate, berberine, oil of oregano, grapefruit seed extract, and aloe vera have some of the best evidence against H. pylori. Pancreatic lactase 1. So we look at that to determine if maldigestion or hypochlorhydria, which is basically low stomach acid, may be present. Rebuild the healthy gastric mucosa. Okay, so we know that H. pylori, if it's causing problems, it's also broken down your gastric mucosa, your stomach lining. So glutamine, DGL, aloe, zinc, particularly zinc carnosine. Zinc carnosine, that form seems to be the most effective here. And then vitamin A, also very important. And then address dental hygiene. The mouth is a reservoir for H. pylori. So a lot of times people that have recurrent or repeat infections, a lot of times they have issues where they have like a root canal that's infected, or a cavity, or gingivitis, or cavitations that are harboring bacteria, streptococcus and other types of bacteria in their mouth. And that is weakening their system and also creating a reservoir for H. pylori. And then another thing so you need you may need a holistic dentist. And then another thing to consider is repeat infections could be from romantic partners. So if a husband and wife, if a married couple, if it's only the wife that's getting treated and, the husband is not getting treated for this, he may have the H. pylori and may be passing it to her. And so through kissing. And so that's an issue as well that you need to address. So if somebody's not getting better, these are things to look at. Normal bacteria now, these are normal, healthy bacteria that are in our system. Okay, and you can see these on the test here. So Bacteroides, Bifidobacterium, Enterococcus, We also have Akkermansia, which is not on that particular test right here, but we do have it typically on the test. And so you're looking at, high and low and things like that. And so normally we want these all to be, in normal ranges. Okay. Now I don't freak out, just if I see something low or something high here. Sometimes, it's just kind of the way it works based on the foods that we're eating and things like that. So I'm not overly concerned. Now, Akkermansia, which unfortunately I didn't have on this, but Akkermansia is one bacteria, and you can see that its last name, mucinophilia, which means mucus loving. It lives deep in the mucus membrane, and that bacteria is a mucus degrader. It helps support mucus production and mucosal health. According to a 2020 study published in Frontiers in Microbiology, low levels of it may be linked to obesity and metabolic dysfunction. On the other hand, 2018 study published in M Systems connected high levels with multiple sclerosis. So, again, you want these to be in balance in general, okay? But for the most part, Akkermansia mucinophilia is a very good, healthy bacteria. And that's spelled wrong. It says mucinophilia, should be. But anyways, it's a normal, healthy bacteria. Intermittent fasting really helps with boosting up Akkermansia mucinophilia. Bacteroides fragilis. This is a gram-negative bacteria, is important for microbial. When it says gram-negative or gram-positive, that just means what the outer layer of the bacteria is. Okay, so that's really, what we're looking at there. So your gram-negative and gram-positive. So gram-negative bacteria is important for microbial balance and neuroimmune health, according to a 2007 study published in Clinical Microbiology Review. They have the most antibiotic resistance. High levels may cause constipation and digestion issues, while low levels may reduce anti-inflammatory gut activities, right? So we're trying to keep all of these kinds of things in balance. Bifidobacterium, gram-positive bacteria found in breast milk, helps colonize the gut at and after birth, commonly found in probiotics. You'll see a lot of bifidobacterium probiotics, and that is one that supports the large intestine, okay? So that one should be, a lot of it in the large intestine, should be in normal levels on this lab here. Let's see, some other normal bacteria, Clostridia, important bacteria in the large intestine that helps protect the gut from pathogens. And low levels are associated with autoimmunity and inflammation, while high levels have been linked to metabolic issues. Enterococcus here, gram-positive lactate producing bacteria. According to a 2017 study published in Gut Liver, high levels may be linked to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So that's one to look at there, the Enterococcus there. So if you're seeing that in high levels, could possibly be linked with SIBO, all right? Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This test is looking at more large intestine, so we can't know for sure, but there is an association there. So it could, if you're looking at seeing other factors as well, be associated with SIBO. Irritable bowel syndrome and related symptoms. Low levels may influence microbiome balance and good bacteria insufficiency. Escherichia, it's a gram-negative bacteria, according to a 2014 study published in the World Journal of Gastrointestinal Pathophysiology. High levels may indicate inflammation and cause chronic inflammatory bowel disease. Low levels may reduce mucosal health and decrease the production of E. coli. Other ones, Faecobacterium prusnitzii. This bacteria supports anti-inflammatory processes and mucosal health. So again, lives in the mucosa. Low levels can lead to autoimmune conditions and inflammatory issues. And that's a bacteria that is, again, very well associated with intermittent fasting, helps boost that. And it looks like it's not on that lab. So Lactobacillus, lactate producing bacteria, high levels may compromise digestion, while low levels may affect mucosal health. And then Enterobacter, that's a gram-negative bacteria closely related with E. coli. Low levels may affect mucosal health. High levels may drive inflammation and dysbiosis. So we're looking at that, but we're just kind of getting an overall view of it. We're not necessarily treating any one specific type of bacteria there. Now, Bacteroidetes are gram-negative bacterial phyla associated with improved metabolic function and a lower propensity for developing metabolic syndrome, whereas Firmicutes are gram-positive bacteria. And gram-positive basically they don't have a cell wall, whereas gram-negative have a cell wall. Gram-positive have a very thick peptidoglycan outer layer, which we call lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. So they have a really potent toxin that they can release. And that is thought to be the reason why they're associated with, when we have high levels, reduced metabolic function and greater propensity for developing metabolic syndrome. So again, gram-negative, no or low levels of LPS they produce as a byproduct of when they die, whereas Firmicutes produce high levels of LPS. So they can be, although both can be problematic at times, the ones when we have more gram-positive, it can be associated with lower metabolic scores. Dysbiosis bacteria. So these are the bacteria that can be that are just more well known for causing problems in the body. And so we're looking at this, and we can see, for example, the Enterococcus. You have Bacillus, you have Enterococcus. Now, Bacillus may go up because you may be taking spore-forming probiotics that are Bacillus strains. And if somebody is taking that, I'm not overly concerned about that number, that Bacillus. But the Enterococcus, along with the Streptococcus, which you see there at the bottom, can both be elevated when somebody has lower levels of stomach acid, like I talked about before. Okay, so I look at that. If I see Streptococcus high like this, I start thinking, okay, maybe low stomach acid is one of the players here. Okay, also the Morganella there, and I think this is an old sample test that I'm showing you guys, because there are some other ones. Let me see. Yeah, the Bacteriaceae family, along with the Morganella, if we're seeing those elevated, those can be signs of SIBO, right? So those are other ones to look at for SIBO, whereas the Pseudomonas can cause more gut inflammation type issues, right? And staph, those staph, they can cause just more gut inflammation issues. So again, Bacillus, I'm not overly concerned, although, if somebody does have constipation, SIBO, and that's like one of the only things marked high, then we may need to address it. The Enterococcus, high levels associated with low stomach acid, can occur due to SIBO, constipation, other digestive issues. Again, Methanobacter family, that produces methane. So methane, oftentimes a methane dominant SIBO, oftentimes can have constipation, issues with constipation. Now, again, we don't know for sure if that's in the small intestine or large intestine, but it's just something to think about and look into. Morganella, it's a gram-negative bacteria that may produce histamine. Okay, it can be an issue for those with histamine intolerance. So that's another one that we're looking at there. The Morganella, looking at that on this test. Again, sorry about the spelling on some of these. These are spelled wrong. High levels may mean inflammation and may lead to diarrhea or SIBO. Pseudomonas, gram-negative bacteria, high levels may occur due to inflammation and lead to loose stools and cramping. And then staph, gram-positive bacteria, high levels may mean inflammation. Strep, it's a gram-positive bacteria. So again, gram-positive, more potent toxicity that's released oftentimes from them. But again, gram-negative can cause problems too. High levels may occur because of low stomach acid, SIBO, constipation, or inflammation with the strep. Now, looking at potential autoimmune triggers, these bacteria actually have been tested and shown that they can actually trigger autoimmunity in the body. So we're looking at that. You can see potential autoimmune triggers. Several of these are associated with rheumatoid arthritis. So Citrobacter, for example, associated with rheumatoid arthritis. Fusobacterium is associated with rheumatoid arthritis and systemic sclerosis. And so, so basically, a couple issues there. Klebsiella is associated with abdominal pain, bloating, gas, diarrhea, and also symptoms of inflammatory bowel disease. So high levels of any of these may indicate gut inflammation. And Klebsiella is also very much associated with higher histamine levels, right? So it can be an issue for people with histamine intolerance. And of course, like it says, pneumonia, Klebsiella pneumonia can also cause pneumonia, right? So if it gets out in the bloodstream, get into the lungs and cause pneumonia, and that can be a major issue. Mycobacterium, high levels of that have been associated with rheumatoid arthritis. Prevotella capri linked to rheumatoid arthritis as well. Okay, it could be caused by a high starch diet, reduced digestive capacity, or reduced stomach acid. So Prevotella is one that I see high often. Proteus as well is another one that I see high often. High levels may mean inflammation in the gut, may lead to diarrhea or loose stools, and may be linked to rheumatoid arthritis. And that was kind of the bottom there, looking at it: Mycobacterium, Prevotella, Proteus, Proteus mirabilis. So again, a lot of these associated with joint pain types of issues. Now you can see Candida here, different types of yeast. What is Candida? Candida is something that lives inside of us. It's a yeast organism, and it actually, is normal in our body. However, if we have, if we're not taking good care of our body, low stomach acid, we're stressed, we're eating high starch, high sugar diets, we can develop a Candida infection, and a Candida infection can cause more problems. We can end up with itchy, dry skin and eczema, vaginal or athlete's foot, heavy liver burden, so it can really wear down our liver, mental impairment and fatigue. Candida releases some toxins that affect our brain, gliotoxin and acetaldehyde, which can really affect brain function and also can cause multiple food sensitivities. So pathogenic yeasts, when we see the yeasts high, this could be due to antibiotic use, high intake of sugar, starches, dietary fungi like beer, bread, nuts, cheese, corn. So these different mycotoxins that could be in there, low stomach acid, impaired immune function, dysbiosis can all cause an elevation in yeast overgrowth. Geotrichum may cause disease in immunosuppressed patients. So people that maybe have gone through chemotherapy, for example. Low level may be a dietary artifact. Okay, certain strains are used to make soft cheeses. Microsporidia may cause diarrhea and wasting, can disseminate to ocular, genitourinary, and respiratory tracts. And then, so I haven't seen the Microsporidia or the Rhodotorula, but I have seen Geotrichum elevated on some people. But the Rhodotorula is common in soil, plants, bathrooms, and in beverages like milk, juice, and water. It may be commensal, so it may not be an issue, and it can cause disease in immunosuppressed patients. And that's the same with the Geotrichum. It can just cause disease in immunosuppressed patients. I'm not overly concerned when I see that elevated. But, if that's one of the only things and somebody has digestive issues, you would consider a low carb diet. We know yeast loves sugar and starch. Intermittent fasting really helps starve down yeast and makes them more vulnerable. And then different antimicrobials like olive leaf, oregano, caprylic acid, pau d'arco, astragalus, ginger, turmeric, all really great against yeast. Biofilm agents, so the yeast or bacteria or any of the things we've talked about can cause a biofilm, which is a protein outer layer, and it can hunker down, especially if it feels like the environment isn't safe for it. So proteolytic enzymes come in, and these enzymes break down that outer layer, making the microbe more susceptible to the antimicrobials and the other things that we're using, the binders like charcoal, clay, zeolite, fulvic and humic acids, which can help bind, grab, pull the bacteria or yeast and remove them from the system. So virus, now we're also going to look at some different gut-based viruses. And viruses are intracellular parasites. They're composed of, some of them have DNA, or RNA, so that can be RNA virus or DNA virus, retrovirus. They're 100 times smaller than bacteria. They don't have the characteristics to be living cells. Intracellular parasites live off of other host cells. So one of the ones that's tested is cytomegalovirus. CMV is a common herpes virus, affects 60% of the US population, linked with many different autoimmune diseases, including lupus, systemic sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis. So 2013 study published in International Journal of Clinical Rheumatology linked CMV to childhood onset systemic lupus. 2005 study published in PLOS Medicine said that CMV may trigger systemic sclerosis. A 2019 study published in Pediatric Diabetes found that getting infected with CMV during early childhood may increase the progression of type 1 diabetes. And 2016 study linked it to rheumatoid arthritis. Now, Epstein Barr is another one that's tested, and we commonly think of as mono, right? And it's a viral infection that affects 90 to 95% of the population, even though most people don't know it. So pretty much all of us get it at some point. Now, for some people, they never really get over it, and it just harbors, stays dormant, and then can flare up during times of stress and cause problems, or just be kind of like a constant source of stealth inflammation in the body. It's been linked to a number of autoimmune diseases as well, including rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, autoimmune thyroid disease like Hashimoto's, Graves' disease. Oftentimes there's an EBV component, Sjogren's syndrome, as well as chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So a very common issue here. We're also going to look at parasites. So different types of parasites. We already talked about Giardia, Entamoeba histolytica, Cyclospora, Cryptosporidium, Dientamoeba fragilis, but there's some other ones too, like Blastocystis hominis here that we're looking at. Common symptoms of infection with a parasite, oftentimes diarrhea, constipation, nausea, abdominal pain, bloating, fatigue, and joint pain. And then we're also going to look at worms, right? There's a lot of different types of worms that we can have and harbor, and some experts believe that everybody has a certain level of worms in their system, and they can be pathogenic or they can be symbiotic, right? Depending on the individual. So typically when we're seeing high levels of certain protozoa in here, particularly like Blastocystis hominis is one that oftentimes you'll see, Cyclospora, you will see, those are pathogenic. Those are, I would say those two and the Entamoeba coli are the most pathogenic here that we're looking at for the protozoa. And then also the worms. If the worms are elevated, I'm typically trying to treat those typically. Now, again, I'm looking at symptoms and history and things like that. Okay. But for worms to be coming out, there could be some issues there. The Ascaris lumbricoides, that's the pinworm. Okay. So you have a bunch of these types of things. Now, key blood testing lab markers that may indicate a parasite infection. So if you're also looking at a blood test, if you have high or low white blood cell count. So typically in acute stage of any sort of infection, your white blood cell count goes up, but over time it goes down, right? If the infection stays and becomes chronic, it will go down. High sensitivity CRP. So these things drive up certain inflammatory proteins like C-reactive protein. So when I see high sensitivity C-reactive protein, I typically think some sort of infection. Could be an infection in the mouth. There's a high propensity for somebody with high CRP to have some sort of oral infection, but it could also be a gut infection, like, for example, a parasite. High eosinophils, that's another thing I want to look at. So if CRP is high, I'm looking at eosinophils. If they're up over 3%, could be an allergy or parasite. High liver enzymes, so a lot of these parasites or viruses too will impact the liver and cause liver enzymes to come up over time. And then I'm looking at low iron and ferritin. That's not typically going to be a virus. That's going to be more the low iron, ferritin, and anemic issues are going to be more related to H. pylori and also parasites because they love iron. Okay. So it's not going to be associated with yeast, but it can definitely be associated with H. pylori and with parasites. Or high ferritin levels. High ferritin, a lot of times you'll see low iron and kind of anemia, but then high ferritin. Okay. And that's because ferritin is a storage form of iron. And so when the body's trying to make sure that the parasites don't get the iron, it will raise up ferritin, or it will not release ferritin to become serum iron to drive up blood cells. Instead, it will keep the iron in the storage form. So high ferritin levels can be what it's trying to do there. Now, last thing we're going to look at here are the intestinal health markers. And so I had mentioned earlier lactase and steatocrit at the top. Normally, we want that lactase 1 up over 500. It's not going to be flagged unless it's under 200. However, if it is, we actually want it up over 500, right? So this person's at 388. So they actually have low stomach acid here. Okay. So that's actually a marker for, lower stomach acid, or at least not optimal stomach acid. And then the steatocrit we're looking at should be under 10%. This person is, okay. They're at 6%. So seems like, for the most part, they're digesting fat okay, which is good. but their beta glucuronidase is elevated. So that's a sign that their phase 2 liver detox system is not working great. Their glucuronidation, they glucuronidate or conjugate different toxins, but then as they're trying to get the toxins out, they have dysbiotic bacteria that are producing this enzyme beta glucuronidase. So it takes a toxin that should be getting out of the body and reactivates it, which can cause more problems in the system. So we'll talk about things to do to reduce that. Fecal occult blood, which obviously can be elevated for somebody with ulcerative colitis or colon cancer, something like that. So that's always a red flag if that's elevated. Secretory IgA, which is an immune component of the gut. Anti-gliadin IgA, so that's a marker for an inflammatory response to gliadin, which is a protein compound that's part of gluten. So if you see that elevated, that person may have gotten some sort of gluten exposure. Calprotectin, which is the most well-researched marker on this part of the test, the intestinal health marker for inflammation, gut inflammation. So we want to see that low. Ideally, I like to see it under 20. Okay, certainly under 50, ideally under 20. Zonulin, okay, so that is an add-on test. And if you get that added on, that is a marker for leaky gut. So when that's elevated, basically we have leaky gut taking place. And then there's also antibiotic resistance genes. So if you're looking to treat, for example, H. pylori with an antibiotic, you can see if that strain, that H. pylori that's in your system, is going to be resistant to certain antibiotics, which can really help you with your treatment protocol. Now, digestion markers, lactase, digestive enzyme. It's a digestive enzyme secreted by the pancreas. Low levels are associated with low stomach acid, poor pancreatic function, gallstones, and cystic fibrosis. Okay, so we talked about earlier, that person 388, they may need a little bit of stomach acid support, but it may actually be more of like a pancreatic enzyme issue, right? Since steatocrit's in a good range. Steatocrit is a measurement of fecal fats. High levels indicate poor bile salt sufficiency, low stomach acid levels, poor pancreatic function, celiac disease, or malabsorption. Okay, this person doesn't have high gut inflammation, so I'm not thinking celiac disease or something like that. 4 major functions of bile: helps with fatty acid metabolism, helps excrete waste products, kills off bad microbes, and also very important for blood sugar metabolism. Okay, symptoms of poor bile flow: diarrhea, bad smelling or trapped gas, stomach cramps, weight loss, pale colored stool. Bile is what puts the brown in your stool. If you have greasy or floating stools, that can be an issue. Very erratic bowel movements. Maybe if you're burping up, if you take fish oil supplement, cod liver oil, and you're burping it up, that's a sign of poor bile flow. For example, could also have referral pain in your right side, your right shoulder blade area. If you're having a lot of referral pain right in that area, that could be a liver gallbladder issue. Now, best home test for bile flow, there's a fat bomb test. So if you go to my website, type in fat bomb, right? We have a recipe for a fat bomb, or you can do it on Google. There's lots of different fat bomb recipes out there. It's basically like coconut and chocolate mixed together. And usually one fat bomb is like 200 to 300 calories of just straight fat. So basically eat like two of these. So you're getting like 500 grams of just not 500 grams of fat, but about 500 calories of fat. And that's testing your bile. Now, normally you should feel fine for the next few hours. Okay. However, if you have poor bile flow, then you may have acid reflux. You may feel nausea. You may get lightheaded, feel fatigued. You might have pain right in your body. You may feel more inflamed in general. So that can be a big factor here. Reflexology and meridian centers and a bile flow support test. Let's see, I didn't have a slide for the reflexology or meridian centers, but it's kind of like this little gap right in between your thumb and your first finger, that little web, right? Sometimes if you have pain in there when you're rubbing in there, that can be a sign. And then again, I talked about like the shoulder blade area. The bile flow support test is basically where you take some sort of bile salt, could be TUDCA, could be taurine, choline, right? We have a supplement called bile flow support. You take that with your fatty meals. And if you feel good taking it, if you feel like you're digesting better, constipation gets better, Your stool quality gets better, right? Reducing inflammation, then that was a sign you needed that, right? So clearly that was helpful for you. Key blood test markers for abnormal bile flow, how high alkaline phosphatase. Okay, that should be roughly between 60 and 90. If it's up higher, 9,500, up over 100, unless you have a broken bone, because it's also a marker for like healing bones, or if you're a child that's growing, that could be a sign of some sort of issue in that gallbladder area. High liver enzymes, so AST, ALT, AG, or GGT, and then also high bilirubin levels as well. All signs that could point to poor bile flow. Symptoms of poor pancreatic enzyme production, so gas and bloating, diarrhea, constipation, abnormal cramping, poor tolerance, particularly to high fiber foods and high FODMAP foods. So like broccoli, cauliflower, things like that. Or if you eat like a sweet potato and you're just noticing that you just feel worse, you have constipation, cramping, things like that could be a sign of poor pancreatic enzyme production. So best at home test, the broccoli test. So you eat some steamed broccoli, and then you see, and that's it, steamed broccoli and salt. And you see how you feel over the next few hours, right? Normally you should feel fine, but if you're noticing a lot of gas, bloating, cramping, it's a sign you're not producing enough pancreatic enzymes. Now, you may also have bacterial overgrowth and dysbiosis, but it's hard to say which of those came first. Most likely the dysbiosis came before the breakdown in digestive enzymes, but you may have that. And you may have a combination of things. You may have low stomach acid, poor bile flow, and poor pancreatic enzymes. In fact, that's very common for people to have all three of these. But that's those kind of at-home tests, the fat bomb tests, the steak tests, broccoli tests, are all tests to help you just understand if it's one of those more specifically than another. And then, of course, the digestive enzyme test. Now, benefits of digestive enzymes, taking them, that can really help, right? And that's just kind of the digestive enzyme test, is you take, 2 to 4 digestive enzymes with a meal, and you just see if you feel better, right? And if you notice that you just are digesting your food better, you have better energy, better mental clarity in comparison to eating the same meal without the enzymes. If you notice that, you may need digestive enzymes, at least for a period of time. And that can really help support your absorption of micronutrients, take stress off your gut, and allow your gut to heal, and reduce food-related inflammation. Now, I talked about that beta-glucuronidase. Beta-glucuronidase is this enzyme that's produced. Okay, you naturally have it, but it also gets produced by your gut bacteria. And if it's elevated, it can cause, basically estrogen, which should be conjugated, to not leave the body, which can elevate the overall amount of estrogen in the body, right? So it can cause estrogen dominance, which can cause a lot of different problems for women: endometriosis, PMS, a lot of different issues like that, menopausal problems. And I see this commonly for men: prostate, colon issues, low testosterone. I see this commonly for a lot of people. They have this elevated beta-glucuronidase, particularly women that with a lot of premenstrual syndrome type issues and menopausal issues. A lot of times they have this issue here with elevated glucuronidase. Gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And I'll talk about how to treat that here in just a minute. But basically our gut, our intestinal mucosa is being fed by our lymph system, and this is called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So it's the GALT. And this is what's producing all of these natural immunoglobulins, this secretory IgA, okay, which help protect. They're our first line of defense against different issues, different pathogens coming into the gut. So that's another thing that we're looking at. So again, going back to these markers, we want that secretory IgA to be in that normal range. If it's really elevated, it's a sign that our gut is trying to fight against some sort of infection. If it's too low, it's a sign that we've had immune suppression, right? So that mucosal membrane is broken down and we're not able to produce enough IgA. And that could be from chronic stress, could be from chronic infections, poor nutrient absorption, a lot of different things like that. So we're looking at that and checking that marker. And then fecal calprotectin, again, like I like to see that under 20, ideally. And so this is a marker for inflammation and ends up in the stool. Treatment options: high lactase, we want to address H. pylori if present. We want to supplement with ginger, apple cider vinegar, betaine HCl, digestive enzymes, okay, to help support stomach acid and digestive enzymes, pancreatic enzymes. Ginger and apple cider vinegar naturally helps stimulate digestive juice production. Any sort of like really sour, tart, sort of carminative really helps activate the vagus nerve, which helps activate the production of these things. High steatocrit, again, poor fat absorption. We want to address gut infections if present. We want to supplement with things like ginger, apple cider vinegar, betaine HCl, digestive enzymes, bile salts, so choline, taurine, ox bile. You may need to use extra ox bile to digest your food, your fatty foods. And then also TUDCA. TUDCA is a really powerful bile salt as well that you can utilize. High beta glucuronidase. You want to address phase 2 liver detoxification with milk thistle, dandelion, quercetin, citrus bioflavonoids, calcium D-glucarate is actually the most effective thing for helping to downregulate beta glucuronidase. Also probiotics and things to support your gut microbiome that we already talked about. Things like aloe and DGL and prebiotics and stuff like that can all be helpful in the process. Secretory IgA, if that's high or low, using immunoglobulins can be helpful. So you can get different types of immunoglobulins like colostrum, hyperimmunized egg immunoglobulin, bovine serum immunoglobulins, all very, very helpful here. L-glutamine, curcumin, and beta-glucan, all helpful for secretory IgA levels. Bringing them up or down. If they're up, it helps regulate the immune system more to bring them down, so we're not in such a massive acute crisis, and by turning down inflammation. And if they're low, it'll help the body to boost up the production of secretory IgA. Now, of course, you want to remove whatever may be the root cause factor of it, but over time, it's going to help boost that production of secretory IgA. And then calprotectin, that inflammatory marker. Again, if that's up over 20, obviously anti-inflammatory support. So immunoglobulins, glutamine, curcumin, quercetin, zinc, aloe vera, resveratrol, proteolytic enzymes, green tea extract, all can be very helpful here in reducing inflammation in the gut and getting that calprotectin under control. So again, back to the 5 R's, like I talked about earlier, you remove, replace, reinoculate, repair, and rebalance. And sometimes you got to kind of go around. Sometimes we'll try to, if somebody's not super symptomatic, we might try actually probiotics first, right? And if they, don't seem to be getting any sort of change with that, we might add in some digestive support, right? And if still not seeing any sort of change, then we may do some repair, right? And if we're still not seeing any change, we might do the remove category, right? Take out the reinoculate, do the remove, and then go back to, reinoculate. So there's different strategies and approaches that people take, but the most common is this process: remove first, remove and replace first. You're doing those together. Then you're reinoculating and repairing while you're continuing to replace, right? So you stop the remove after you get rid of the pathogens, and then you're doing the replace, reinoculate, and repair all together. And the whole time you're trying to obviously do the rebalance. And that's kind of like your lifetime support, keeping your sleep, your diet, your exercise, and your stress management under control. So hopefully this is really helpful for you guys. And I do have another video on gut inflammation where I go into more detail on, some of these antimicrobials and immune support strategies and things like that. So you can check that out as well. But hopefully this has been helpful for you guys, and everybody be blessed.